The moving truck arrived on a Thursday, 3 days after we buried my mother. I was 29 years old, standing in my mother's driveway in the same black dress I had worn to her funeral, watching two men in gray uniforms carry boxes through the front door of the house where I had learned to walk, learned to read, learned every important thing about becoming a woman in this world. My brother Gary stood on the front lawn talking on his phone like he was scheduling a lunch reservation. Casual, confident, completely unbothered. He saw me pull in. He didn't stop his call. I sat in my car for a long moment just looking at the house. The white shutters my mother repainted herself every 3 years because she insisted hired painters never match the color exactly right. The hydrangea bushes she planted along the front fence the summer I turned 7. The porch swing where she read library books on warm evenings with a glass of sweet tea, perfectly content watching the neighborhood settle into darkness without saying a word. 3 days. Gary ended his call and walked toward me with the expression he had worn my entire life. The one that said he had already decided how something was going to unfold and considered any conversation about it a pure formality. "Cassie," he said when I stepped out. "You should have called first." I looked at the moving truck. "You should have called me before this." He shrugged. "I'm handling things." Handling things. That was Gary's phrase for every decision he made without consulting anyone. He had been handling things since childhood. Efficiently. Confidently, almost always in the direction that benefited Gary most. "Where is everything going?" I asked. "Storage. I'm listing the house next week." Next week. Our mother had been in the ground for 72 hours, and Gary was listing the house next week. I looked at him carefully. "Have you spoken with Mom's attorney?" He waved his hand. "Talked to Franklin months ago. Everything is straightforward. Franklin Akers had been my mother's attorney for over 20 years. Quiet man. Careful eyes. The particular patience of someone who had spent decades watching families navigate grief and greed at the same time. He had called me 8 weeks earlier. Not Gary, me, and asked me to come in at my earliest convenience. I had gone the following Tuesday. Gary knew nothing about that Tuesday. There were a great many things Gary didn't know. My mother's name was Dorothy Jean Calloway. She was 74 years old when she died of congestive heart failure in the bedroom she had occupied for 40 years. She died on a Sunday morning in March while light came through her curtains the way she always liked. Soft, indirect, nothing too harsh. My mother had opinions about light the way other people have opinions about politics. Firmly held and not particularly open to debate. She was the daughter of a factory worker from Eastern Ohio, and she never forgot the lessons that upbringing produced. That nothing of value arrives without work. That generosity only counts when it costs you something real. That people who assume they understand a situation without asking questions usually understand it least of all. She raised 2 children in that house on Maple Creek Road. Gary came first. 3 years later, I arrived. From the beginning, we were different in the ways siblings sometimes are. Not opposites, just shaped by the same materials into entirely different forms. Gary was 34 now, loud and charming and decisive, the kind of person who filled rooms and made things happen and believed that confidence was its own form of correctness. He worked in commercial real estate in Columbus and was genuinely good at it. He was also the kind of son who called our mother every Sunday and visited at Thanksgiving and Christmas and believed that consistency of contact was equivalent to depth of relationship. I was different. I was 29, quieter, and I had stayed close to home the way some daughters do. Not because I lacked ambition, but because proximity felt like its own form of love. I worked as a registered nurse at the county hospital 20 minutes from Maple Creek Road. I stopped at my mother's house twice a week for dinner. I sat with her during her cardiology appointments and drove her to the pharmacy and spent Sunday afternoons in her kitchen learning recipes she had been promising to teach me since I was 12 years old. I knew my mother's life in the particular, detailed way you only know someone when you show up for the ordinary parts. Gary knew the highlights. That difference mattered more than either of us understood until the week she died. My mother began talking about the house seriously about 18 months before she passed. Not in a morbid way. Dorothy Calloway was not a morbid woman. She talked about practical things practically. The way people do when they have lived long enough to understand that preparation is a form of love. We were sitting in her kitchen on a Wednesday evening in October. She was teaching me her biscuit recipe, the one her own mother had passed down, the one that required a specific technique with cold butter that she had never been able to fully explain in words, but could demonstrate perfectly with her hands. Outside the kitchen window, the maple tree in the backyard had gone completely orange. Mom set the biscuit pan in the oven and wiped her hands on her apron. I want to talk to you about the house, she said. I waited. Your brother has ideas about what should happen to it when I'm gone. I know. Gary had mentioned selling it more than once, efficiently, logically, as though a house was simply an asset requiring liquidation rather than a place where a family had lived for 40 years. Mom sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I have different ideas, she said. She told me everything that evening, about the conversation she had already been having with Franklin Acres, about the structure she had decided on and why, about the particular reasoning of a woman who had watched her own mother lose a family property to careless estate planning and decided that would not happen again. When she finished, I was quiet for a long moment. Does Gary know? I asked. Gary knows what I want him to know, she said simply. That was my mother. Precise, deliberate, and completely uninterested in explaining herself before the appropriate moment. Cassie, she said, looking at me directly across the kitchen table, I need you to go see Franklin. Soon. Before anything changes with my health. I went the following week. Franklin Acres' office was on the second floor of a building downtown that smelled like old wood and coffee. He was a man in his late 60s with reading glasses. He was always pushing up his nose and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that most legal problems got worse when people rushed them. He had a folder ready when I arrived. He explained everything methodically. My mother had updated her estate documents 14 months earlier. Quietly, without announcing it to Gary, without creating a family conversation about it. The house on Maple Creek Road had been placed into a living trust with my name listed as the sole trustee and beneficiary. Not split between Gary and me. Not divided equally the way people assume family property always gets divided. Mine. Franklin explained my mother's reasoning carefully. The house had been purchased jointly by my parents in 1987. When my father passed 12 years earlier, full ownership transferred to my mother. She had paid the mortgage alone for the final 11 years. She had maintained it alone, repaired it alone, kept it alive alone. It was hers to give as she chose, and she had chosen. Franklin also explained something else. A secondary document my mother had asked him to prepare. A letter of intent, signed and notarized, explaining in my mother's own words why she had made this decision. Not legally binding beyond the trust itself, but clear, unambiguous. Written by a woman who understood that clarity after death is a gift to the living. I drove home from Franklin's office and sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a long time. Not because I was surprised exactly, because I understood what my mother had done and why, and the weight of that understanding felt enormous and precious simultaneously. She trusted me with the thing that mattered most to her. That was not a small thing. My mother's health declined faster than any of us expected in the final 6 weeks. What had been managed heart failure became something more serious in February. She was hospitalized twice, released, hospitalized again. I spent most of those weeks either at the hospital or at her house, sleeping in the spare room, making sure her medications were correct, her appointments were kept, and she was never alone in the particular way sick people should never be alone. Gary came down from Columbus twice. Both visits lasted a weekend. He was genuinely sad. I want to be clear about that. Gary loved our mother in his way. He simply loved her from a distance, the way people love things they have decided are stable and permanent, without the particular attention that proximity demands. Mom passed on a Sunday morning at home, the way she wanted. I was there. Gary drove down that afternoon. The funeral was the following Thursday. Flowers, hymns, a reception at the church hall afterward with casseroles and condolences, and the particular exhausted kindness of a community saying goodbye to someone it had known for 40 years. My mother had lived in that county her entire life. Half the county showed up. Gary stood beside me at the reception, shaking hands, accepting hugs, doing the social work of grief competently the way he did most things. Afterward, driving home, he called me. We need to talk about the house, he said. Okay. I've already been in contact with a realtor, Diane Marsh. She handles estate sales specifically. Good reputation. She thinks we can list by the end of the month and close within 60 days if we price it right. I was quiet. Cassie? I heard you. I know it's fast, he said, but holding on to it costs money. Property taxes, utilities, maintenance. It doesn't make sense to wait. When did you contact a realtor? A brief pause.
Few weeks ago, just preliminary conversations. A few weeks ago. While our mother was still alive, Gary had already been having preliminary conversations with a realtor about selling her house. I said nothing. We'll split it down the middle, obviously, he continued. Whatever the sale price comes to. He said it so naturally. We'll split it down the middle. As though that were already established. As though the arrangement were already decided. As though my mother had not sat across from me at her kitchen table in October over a pan of biscuits and made an entirely different plan. I'll call you tomorrow, Gary, I said. Okay. Don't overthink it. It's really straightforward. Straightforward. The second time someone had used that word about a situation that was not straightforward at all. I hung up and drove the rest of the way home in silence. The moving truck arrived 3 days later. I had not called Gary back the night before because I had spent that night on the phone with Franklin Acres instead. Not panicking, just confirming. Making sure I understood exactly what the document said and what my options were and what the correct sequence of events should be. Franklin was calm the way he always was. The trust is valid and recorded, he said. The house transferred to the trust at the time of your mother's death automatically. Gary has no legal authority over that property. He doesn't know that. No, Franklin said. He doesn't. What do I do? Franklin was quiet for a moment. You could call him tonight and explain everything. Or, or, you let him arrive at the house tomorrow, and we handle it properly with documentation in hand. I thought about Gary on the phone telling me not to overthink it, telling me it was straightforward. Already in contact with a realtor while our mother was still alive. I'll be at the house tomorrow, I said. I'll have everything ready, Franklin said. That was the conversation Gary didn't know about. I pulled into the driveway at 9:30 in the morning. The moving truck was already there. Two men were working steadily. Gary was supervising from the lawn the way Gary supervised everything, standing slightly apart, phone in hand, directing without touching anything himself. He told me I should have called. I told him he should have called me first. Then I asked about Franklin, and he waved his hand and said everything was straightforward. And I looked at my brother for a long, quiet moment and felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Something older and sadder than anger. This was the moment I had been preparing for since October. Gary, I said, I need you to stop the movers. He frowned. What? Please stop the movers. Right now. Something in my voice made him pause. Not the words. The steadiness behind them. Gary had known me for 29 years, and he had rarely heard me sound like that. Cassie, what is going on? I reached into my bag and removed the folder Franklin had prepared. I held it out toward him. Gary stared at the folder without taking it. What is that? Mom's estate documents, I said. The current ones. Updated 14 months ago. He still didn't take it. I've seen Mom's documents. You've seen the ones from 7 years ago, I said. These are different. He took the folder slowly. The way people take things they already sense will be unwelcome. He opened it. He read the first page. Then the second. His expression moved through confusion. Then disbelief. Then something harder. This isn't right, he said. It's recorded with the county. Franklin can confirm everything if you want to call him. Gary looked up at me. She left the house to you. Yes. Just you. Yes. He closed the folder. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he simply stood there on the lawn of our mother's house with the folder in his hands while the two movers watched uncertainly from the porch. She didn't tell me, he said finally. No, I agreed. She didn't. Why? That was the question I'd been sitting with since October. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer was painful in the particular way truths are painful when they reveal something a person should have already understood about themselves. I looked at my brother carefully. Because she knew what you would do, I said quietly. Gary stared at me. She knew you would contact a realtor before she was gone, I continued. She knew you would move quickly. She knew you would make it efficient. I paused. She didn't want it to be efficient, Gary. She wanted it to stay in the family. His face flushed. I am family, you are, I said. But you weren't going to keep it. The movers had completely stopped working now. One of them quietly set down the box he was carrying and looked toward the truck. Gary looked down at the folder again, then at the house, then back at me. And I watched my brother. Loud, confident, efficient Gary who handled things and made decisions and never questioned his own momentum. Slowly understand that this time he had arrived at a situation entirely after it had already been settled. He called me 4 times that evening. The first call was anger. Not yelling exactly, but close. The controlled fury of someone who feels ambushed by circumstances they believe they should have been informed about. He used words like unfair and blindsided, and she wasn't thinking clearly. I let him talk. The second call was negotiation. He had spoken to his own attorney. There were possible grounds, he said, for contesting the trust based on undue influence. He said it carefully, almost apologetically, the way people float ideas they know are weak but feel compelled to try. I told him Franklin had anticipated that possibility. The letter of intent my mother had written and signed explained her reasoning in her own words with complete clarity. A woman who had never been confused about anything in her life, writing without confusion about the most important decision of her final years. There was a long silence after I said that. The third call came around 9 in the evening. Gary's voice had changed. Quieter. The particular exhausted quality voices get when the fighting has cost more than the fight was worth. Did you know? He asked, before she died. Did you know she was doing this? She told me in October. I said honestly. She asked me to go see Franklin. I did. And you didn't tell me. She asked me not to. Another long silence. I loved her too, Cassie. I know you did. He stopped. Started again. I thought I was doing the right thing. Moving quickly. Being practical. That's what you do with estates. That's what you do with assets. I said gently. Mom wasn't thinking about assets. The fourth call came at midnight. Brief. Gary's voice completely different now. Stripped of strategy, stripped of argument, just a tired man in his mid-30s who had just spent a long day understanding something difficult about himself. Can I come see the house? He asked. Not to argue. Just to see it. Yes. I said. Of course. He came the following Saturday. I was already there when he arrived, sitting on the porch swing with 2 cups of coffee. He walked up the front path slowly, looking at the hydrangea bushes, the white shutters, the porch where we had both spent summers without thinking about how much those summers would matter later. He sat down beside me and took the coffee without saying anything. We sat together for a while just looking at the front yard. I used to hate this swing, Gary said finally. You said it was boring. Everything that didn't involve moving was boring when I was 12. I smiled. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. She really planned all of this, 14 months before she died. She never said a word to me. She said what she needed to say to the right people. I told him. That was Mom. Gary was quiet for a moment. Then, I had a buyer in mind. Someone from Columbus. He was going to pay well over asking. I know. He looked at me sideways. You're not going to sell it. No. He nodded slowly. Not happily, but honestly. What are you going to do with it? I looked at the front yard, at the maple tree visible around the side of the house, at the hydrangeas that would bloom again in another few months if someone remembered to water them correctly. Live in it, I said. For a while.
Just the fact, acknowledged. That wasn't right. No, I agreed. It wasn't. I told myself it was practical. Getting ahead of things. He shook his head slowly. But I think I just didn't want to sit with it. That surprised me a little. Gary admitting something uncomfortable about himself was not something I had much experience with. Grief is hard to sit with, I said. Yeah. He looked down at his coffee. Easier to make plans. I understood that more than he probably realized. We all find our own ways to avoid the stillness that loss demands. She knew, I said quietly. That's why she did it this way. Gary looked at me. Not to punish you, I continued. She knew you would try to outrun the grief with efficiency. She knew you'd have the house listed before you'd finish crying. I paused. She wanted to make sure someone was here to slow things down. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then, very quietly. She always understood us better than we understood ourselves. Yes, I said. She did. I moved into the house on Maple Creek Road 6 weeks later. It felt strange at first. The way inhabiting someone else's grief always feels strange. Every room held my mother in some way. The particular smell of her kitchen, the books arranged on her shelves exactly as she liked them, the specific quality of morning light in the bedroom she had occupied for 40 years. I moved slowly through those first weeks. Not decorating, not rearranging, just living alongside what she had left. Gradually, the house began to feel like mine without feeling less like hers. That's the thing about inheriting a place from someone who loved it. You don't erase them from it. You add yourself alongside them. 2 generations in the same rooms, the same walls holding different memories. I planted new hydrangeas along the back fence in late April. The ones my mother had planted 30 years ago were still blooming beautifully, but I wanted something I had chosen myself. Something that would grow up knowing this was my garden now. Franklin called in early May to confirm all the formal transfer paperwork was complete, clean, recorded, finished. I thanked him. Your mother was a very deliberate woman, he said. She was. She cared very much that this was done correctly. I know. He paused, briefly. She also asked me to give you this when everything was settled. He mailed it that afternoon. A small envelope with my name on the front in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single index card, the kind she used for recipe notes, with 3 sentences written in her careful script. The house knows who loves it. Take care of the hydrangeas. Don't let Gary talk you into anything for at least a year. I laughed out loud alone in her kitchen. Real laughter. The kind that arrives mixed with tears and feels like both things simultaneously. I pinned the card to the refrigerator where it still hangs today. Gary and I talk every week now. Not every Sunday at 7 the way he called our mother. Different days, different times. But regularly. Honestly. With a directness that wasn't quite there before all of this happened. He came back to the house in June with his wife and their 2 kids. We had dinner on the back porch while the kids ran around the yard. His daughter, who is 6, discovered the old tire swing my father put up in the maple tree 30 years ago and spent most of the evening demanding to be pushed. Watching Gary push his daughter on our father's tire swing in our mother's backyard. I thought about what my mother had said in October, sitting at the kitchen table. She hadn't left the house only to me because Gary didn't deserve it. She left it to me because she understood which one of us would keep it. Which one of us would slow down long enough to let the house remain what it had always been. Not an asset, not a transaction, but a place. A continuing place. The kind families build across generations when they are paying attention to the right things. I think she was right. And I think somewhere she already knew that giving the house to me was also the thing most likely to bring Gary back to it. Not as an owner, as a brother. As someone returning to a place that belongs to him in all the ways that don't appear in legal documents. He sat beside me on the porch after dinner while the kids chased fireflies across the yard. You did the right thing, he said. I looked at him. With all of it, he added. The way you handled everything. He paused. Mom chose well. That meant more than I expected it to. She chose what she knew, I said. He nodded. Looked out at the yard. At his daughter catching her first firefly in cupped hands, running toward him to show him. Face lit up with the particular joy children carry before they learn that some things don't last. Gary leaned forward and opened his hands and let her show him. That was enough. I am 30 years old now. I live on Maple Creek Road in the house where I learned to walk and read and become who I am. The hydrangeas bloom every summer. The porch swing still creaks in the same place it always has. The maple tree in the backyard has grown thick enough that the tire swing hangs differently than it did when we were children. Lower, more settled. The way things settle when they have been in one place long enough. Some mornings I make biscuits from the recipe my mother taught me. Cold butter, the right technique, a specific folding motion I can now demonstrate with my hands but would struggle to explain in words. exactly the way she described it, exactly the way her mother described it before her. That is what continuity looks like. Not dramatic, not legal. Just a woman in her mother's kitchen on a quiet morning, making something that connects her backward through time to people she loved and forward to people she hasn't met yet. My mother understood something most people only learn too late. The things that matter most are rarely the things that move the fastest. They are the things that stay. The houses people return to. The recipes passed hand to hand across kitchen tables. The hydrangeas someone planted 30 years ago that still come back every summer without being asked. Gary wanted to sell all of that in 60 days. My mother spent 14 months making sure that couldn't happen. That was her final gift to both of us. Not the house itself, but the reason to come back to it. Together. As family. As people who had been shaped by the same walls and the same light and the same woman who had opinions about everything and was right about most of it. If you have ever been the quiet one, the one who stayed close, the one who showed up for the ordinary parts that nobody photographs or celebrates particularly heroic, I hope you know that your mother noticed. They always notice. And sometimes, in the most deliberate and loving way possible, they make sure the people who assume loudness equals ownership find out that it doesn't. Quietly. Correctly. Right on time. If this story meant something to you today, if it reminded you of someone you lost or a place that still holds them, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Because some houses are more than houses. And some women plan further ahead than anyone expects.